Hi everyone, welcome to the second part of the video on how to create a faux marble effect with Annie Sloan Polished Plaster. Second part of the tutorial. So we're here in my kitchen, which also serves as my lab, and soon I'm gonna disappear from the picture. You're gonna see only my hands. And we're gonna start from that board that I mentioned in tutorial part 1. I have already primed the board with some old white. You can also go with original or whatever you want, but in this case, I'm looking to accomplish a gray marble effect. So I'm interested in having a white foundation or an ivory foundation if I were using original. So I'm gonna use very little plaster because I'm gonna rely on this foundation. So I put two coats of old white and I sanded it with a 400 grit sandpaper to make it very smooth. Okay, so now from there, I'm gonna turn this around. And if my camera stays in place, which is to be hoped, and then you guys are gonna see my hands. Let's see if it works. It's not collaborating, but we will get it to collaborate. Okay, all right, so small trowel that will be able to enter my the tin over the plaster, and I'm gonna pick it with this trowel and put it on this other trowel. So here we go. Now, very, very important, your trowels need to be always very clean because otherwise you're gonna carry with you a lot of things that are not good. So we will clean it probably several times throughout the process. So you just come in and start distributing your plaster over your surface. Now, the way you incline your trowel is probably, I wanna say, between a 30 degrees when you go in to down to a 15 degrees, roughly, right? So you come in and you then start distributing. Now, the plaster dries out quite fast, so you want to operate quite quickly. And you don't wanna, over spread it. You just wanna make it even. Now, if there's any little things that get in the way, don't worry, we can get rid of them later. And obviously the intention here is to create a smooth surface. We will probably do 2 coats of it, and then we will burnish it, and I'll show you how. So I am very careful to ensure that I am covering all the areas and not leave anything out, knowing that it's quite forgiving, so you can come back and fix any possible areas you didn't cover. Now, if I had a larger area, I would probably use a larger trowel so that you can process it much quicker. But for this area, this is very convenient. Okay, so this is what it looks like after 1 coat. So you can see that it's quite smooth, but it's not perfect. You see some marks still. It's okay, we're gonna fix them. Don't over brush it because you don't want it to pull off at some point or to create dents. But this is fine, okay? So we're gonna let it dry a little bit, but it dries very quickly. It dries, I wanna say, in 5 minutes, depending on the humidity of the atmosphere. I think you can tell now why I put the frog tape around it, because it creates a little buffer for me to, first of all, to hold it and to go overboard, but also it will allow me to pull it out and then have a nice line around it instead of having it all the way down here. Again, it's my preference, but it's not necessary, right? You could go all the way, especially if you want to frame it later. You could also go all the way till the border. So your decision. There you go. So we're going to wait a little bit and then we're going to do another round. All right, so this is how it dries. I have also given it a slight light sand with a 400 degree sandpaper, cleaned my trowel. I said I cleaned it, but cleaned my trowel, which is very important. And I'm gonna go ahead and add another layer on top. Just checking that you guys can see it. There you go. You can go in whichever direction. I tend to do it this way but you know, everybody's got his own style. Make sure that you cover all the spaces. And again, play with the angles of your trowel between 30 and 15 degrees so that you can, you know, offload it as you need to. You can also use a second trowel to help you move the paste from the trowel over when it's kind of getting too hard to put on the surface. I generally manage with one, but sometimes I need to have two. Make sure you go into all the areas on the borders so that you don't leave uncovered spaces. And it's pretty simple. And again, the intent here is to make it as smooth as possible. Now, what we're starting to do here, we're starting to press already a little bit more, because that's what we call burnishing, right? Burnishing is basically pressing the plaster in to make it, make the shine come through. Now, the burnishing needs to be done when the plaster has started kind of coming to tack, if I can use a term that we use for wax. So if it's too fresh, you can't burnish it, right? So wait, just, you can feel it when it's starting to get tacky, then, and you feel like it's drying up, then you're no longer basically distributing it, but you are actually pushing it in, okay? So you see, this is my surface. It's not perfect, but I will then sand it a little bit, okay? So I think that for burnishing, I would recommend you do another cleanup of your trowel while this is drying, and then go ahead and do the burnishing. I'll show you in a second. You don't want this dirty while you burnish, because otherwise you might have a line that destroys everything. All right, so I just have cleaned my trowel again, and here I go, and I push the plaster in. This is what we call burnishing, which is basically making the shiny part come through. So it requires a little bit of patience, which is not my forte. Ideally you have a trowel that is quite flexible for the burnishing. This is probably not ideal. That's why, in theory, it would be better for me to use this one if it were clean, because it's much more flexible. Actually, let me do this and clean it so that I am in a better place. Because if it's not flexible, you might end up getting some lines, right? So you can tell that this one has a higher flexibility, and this is what I'm using for my burnishing. You're leaving some lines in some places, and it's okay. I think the plaster is a little too fresh here for the burnishing, but you know, you just go on and repeat this till, you know, you start seeing some lines coming up that look like marble and some shininess. That's when you feel that your burnishing is done. So as you get close to finishing the burnishing part, this is roughly where you should get. I still have a couple of areas which are a little not completely dry. So I'm getting the burnishing more, the burnishing effect more in other areas. But you can see, you already see the shining. And once I'm done also with this part, in theory, you could even stop here because it's got already some marbling look. But obviously we want to take it to the next level. So once we're done with this, we're going to give it a, and we need to wait for it to be dry, obviously, but we're going to give it a slight sanding or a 320, 400. I'm going to do it at 400 manually, but otherwise you can also do with the sander if it's a larger surface, because this is really your foundation that needs to be super smooth so that whatever you build on top is going to look marbly. All right, that's cool. Okay, so this is where we're standing now. I'm gonna put it like this so you can see the sheen. We have quite a sheen. You see the sheen? Yeah. So this is when I come in with a 400 grit sandpaper or 320. I have 400 handy here, so I'm gonna do 400. And you just, you know, eliminate some of the imperfections very lightly. Don't sand it if it's still wet to the touch. You can tell when it's dry. Now, I had a couple of imperfections, so I came back with a little bit of plaster with this smaller trowel, and I fixed those imperfections, and I reburnished on top. So yeah, you need to make sure that your surface is very even. I mean, if there's a defect, we could even fix it later, but if you have a good foundation, it's always easier. This part is a little wetter, so I'm being careful as I sand here because I patched it. And so I gotta be careful that I'm not pulling something out. Anyway, so this is it. So now that this is done, we are ready to do the foundational lines with the color, which is what everybody has been waiting for. Okay, so we are getting ready to do the larger lines, so use the color, which is probably the part that everybody is waiting for. So this requires a little bit of organization, and because otherwise it gets messy very quickly. So I highly recommend having a little plate or dish or cup for each of the colors plus one for the plaster. So in this case, I have 2 colors, graphite, Paris gray, and 1 for the plaster. So you can do your mixes. You need something like a palette knife or a stick to mix so that you can mix in each of them. And then we will move it over to the trowel. Now, I use these dishes because they're flat, so it's very easy for me to go in then with the trowel and collect the plaster to put it on the other trowel. You do what you like, but that's what I prefer doing. So I'm gonna take some Paris gray here, and we like Paris gray for marble because it has a little bit of yellow in it, and that's what gives it some interesting finish when you mix them up, right? Now remember, when you put the color, it will get toned down a little bit by the plaster, so you want to, you know, make sure that you add enough to obtain the color you want. So I'm gonna do the same with graphite here. At the time, when I did it in Atlanta, I didn't have any graphite handy, so I used Athenian black, so I used very little of it because obviously I wanted to have more of a grayish look. So yeah, so you simply come in and mix your color with the plaster. The mix doesn't have to be perfect because in any case, the color will be shaded and have tons of different tones. So even if you have a little bit of imperfection in your mix, it's not a problem. Now you may want to get rid of where you have a lot of concentration, but I'm not going to spend my time too much mixing because I am happy when I get to something like this. So this is for one, same for the other. Again, if I have too much Paris gray or too little, if I have too little Paris gray, I will add more. If I have too much, I can always add some plaster to tone it down, okay? This is probably enough. I don't need to go any further than this. So you just make sure that your palette knives have, you know, leave all the stuff on the surface. And then I have my plaster here, so I'm pushing these guys a little further down there so they get out of my way. Clean my hands, get my board handy, which I have sanded previously. Can you see it? Yes, you can. So here we go. So this is the tool that I want. So I'm gonna take some of the graphite plaster and put it on the trowel, for instance, here. I should try not to go on the other side if possible. It's not the end of the world, but. And then I'm gonna do the same thing here, but I'm probably gonna use the palette knife. It's probably easier. Yeah, use the palette knife for this. You're gonna be more surgical, and you're not gonna use the other guy. Okay, so yeah, so here you go. You got 2 colors on it. Obviously, if you want 3 colors, you can't do that. And so I am gonna go diagonally. I'm assuming that I want to look at it this way, for instance. And you see, I already have some marble effect here. You guys can still see it? Yes. So Try to not to start too far, because otherwise you're gonna have a blank. So you could probably want to start in a way that, there you go, like this. And you try to keep it at a 15-degree angle and go all the way down. See how cool it is? Don't smear it yet in there. Do your other lines. One of my lines I'm gonna imagine is this. And if I feel I haven't gone too far, I can do that. And then let's see, I'm gonna, for instance, have one here, come in all the way down here. See, here I did mostly graphite and very little Paris gray, but I can correct that. So then you can start coming in and pushing it down and getting rid, obviously, of the excess, making sure that the lines got blurred, like so. Again, don't worry too much about mistakes, because you can always tone it down. Now here, what I would do here is that I would probably not insist much anymore with the trowel that I have. I'm gonna offload it, probably here, for instance. I'm gonna offload it, clean it. Okay, I used the wrong. Clean it. And then I am gonna start pushing it down and burnishing it, all right? Or at least getting rid of the excess, right? So you come in here, but it's important that you clean it up, because otherwise you drag stuff around all over the place. And even here, clean it up again. Especially if there's a lot of residue from the previous pass, you want to make sure you're not dragging it around. These lines like this, they are not very desirable. So if you get some of those, you can always tone them down a little bit like this. Oh, this one here, I'm not sure I'm super in love with it. So I can always come in here and tone it down a little bit. Like so. Also, the straight lines are not super desirable. So if you have too much of a straight line, I will show you later how you can eliminate them. And I already still have this one here that has a little bit of residue. So I will remove it. See, my trowel is not perfectly clean, and that is what happens when your trowel is not perfectly clean. So it's not the end of the world, but it's good actually that you see it, because then you see what you need to avoid. Okay, so passing in with your nail is also a good way to make sure that everything is gone. And then I'm going to come back and re-insist to make sure that I'm getting rid of anything that I don't want. Okay, so you're still with me, hopefully. All right, so once we are here, I don't think you need to wait too much for it to dry. I generally go ahead and add another layer of pure plaster, because it's gonna help me. It's not so pure because I made the mistake to use this for those colors, but that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Pure plaster, the pure plaster will help you tone it down and send it to the back, because we want layering, right? So that's what this is going to do. And you decide how much you want to send them back to the background, depending on what you want your project to look like, right? So you may even consider, in some places, do a lot of sending back, and in some other places less, right? For instance, here I'm going to try to have more black here and less black there, or dark gray. So I'm gonna insist more with my plaster here. And then I'm gonna use it also where I made a couple of mistakes with those lines to help me tone those lines down. See how I erase them? They become much less evident. And this is very helpful to push it to the back. But you may not want to do it everywhere, depending on the effect that you wish to accomplish. Right, okay, so this is where we are getting. It's still not perfect, but it's getting close. So Now, what you could also do is decide that you want another little bit of gray because you don't have enough. And for instance, here I might say, okay, I'm gonna add some gray here that goes all the way down here, right? So this stripe might go down this down. So this is a very marbly thing, right? Marble does that, right? And then again, I tone it down a little bit with some white. All right, okay, so this is it. Well, this is it. This is it for the large lines. The next step from here is to let it dry and sand it with 1000. And at that point, we are ready to do the smaller lines. And then we should be close to the end. All right, so here we are after the sanding. It's quite smooth, and so we are ready to do our the smaller lines. Now, if you want to sand it further back to the background, you can do another round of plaster. It's totally fine. I closed mine so it doesn't dry, cleaned up my trowels again, and now we're gonna work on the smaller lines. For the smaller lines, you have two options. Either you use a wash of the two colors that we used before, which were Paris gray and graphite, or since I have some left here, I am going to use this. Now, we gotta be careful because this is mixed with plaster. You want it very, very watery. So what I generally do is that I put some water on another dish, like 2 pools of water, and then I start, for instance, with Paris gray. I pick up some from my Paris gray plaster and I dilute it a lot. So basically I lose the plaster, or almost, it's a pity to, not to use the color that I have. You don't want the paint to be muddy because otherwise you can't drag it, because that's the whole purpose of the exercise. But you don't want it to be too watery either, because otherwise it's gonna give you a pool of water immediately. So this is probably okay. I am gonna hold the brush this way, and I'm gonna do pretty much the same thing as Jonathan does in his tutorials, and come and figure out a place where I think it would make sense to have some lines. Now, example here, I didn't put enough color, so I'm not getting much, but it's better that way because then you test out how much color you need to put versus putting too much and then regretting it. So I think there's a little too much. And then I can come here and do my other lines. I'm starting with the thin, the less, the darker lines, the lighter lines. But if I wanted to do a darker one, I can start with one of those and come here and, for instance, have one starting here, dragging it down. You may want to do something like this. Again, I am being very careful with the quantity of color that I'm putting, and so I'm being probably too careful because I'm not getting much color on. But I'd rather do it that way than put it too much and then I'm going to regret it. Again, you don't want this to be too plastery because otherwise you can't drag it and it's going to make a blob and you can't really manipulate it. So if you're afraid that it's going to be too thick, then just create a wash of what you want and go from there. So I am going randomly here, but with a feeling of what a marble would do. And you could also mix a little bit the Paris gray with the graphite if you wish. If you want to obtain like an intermediate color, you can do that. I'm always mindful of the quantity of paint that I have on my brush. And you can do something in a different direction too, if you feel it makes sense. There you go. So this is it. And then you can add as many as you wish. This is just an example and a test right on the board. Okay, All right, then from here, we will let it dry. This time we don't have practically any plaster in what we added, so there's no need to sand it, but if you want, you can sand it. Another thing you can also do is if you want to push back some of these lines again and then add some others on top, you can come over with another layer of plaster, push it back again surgically and strategically in the places that you want to, and then it will create another layer. We could imagine also here that we could have another line or something here. Anyway, so you get the gist. So once this is dry, and it will dry quite fast because it's all practically a wash, we will then wax it and then buff it. And then our work is done. Okay, so my piece is practically ready. I have lightly sanded it. I have come up in some specific areas and been a little surgical with some additional plaster where I wanted to tone down those lines that I created. But this is really up to you, you know, based on what you see. And now we're ready to wax it. So a lot of people ask me, why do you wax? Do you wax for protection? Do you wax for sheen? Well, you really probably do it for both. When I was a kid in Italy and we all had marble floors, my aunt was, every time she was cleaning the floor, afterwards she would put in wax on it and she was going with the machine, buffing it, right? So the intent is to create an additional sheen to what it has already, because it definitely has a sheen, you probably can tell. And also to protect it, because marble is porous, and so if you put something with water or with coffee or something like that, you may create some stains. So wax will protect it and give it another twist of sheen, okay? So, you know, you would wax it like you would wax a piece of furniture. Now, obviously, if it's a larger surface, it's a little more laborious. In this case, the buffing can be done manually once the wax has, you know, cured, or at least after a day. But otherwise, you could come in and buff it with a machine, right? I have some traces on my brush. So that's it, really. So tomorrow I will buff it, and then we will be done, and then take off the tape so that it has a nice and clean demarcation from the piece underneath. Here is the piece after buffing and after removing the tape, and I've taken it outside so you guys can see the sheen a little better. It's quite shiny, and you can see why also I chose Paris Gray, because incorrectly I said earlier that there's a yellow in Paris Gray. No, Paris Gray has got blue and orange. I apologize, but the presence of orange gives me those very interesting darker, you know, warmer lines that probably I wouldn't have accomplished with Chicago Gray. So again, this, I could have gone a little further and toned down some of the other lines, but I was comfortable with what I had. And so this is it. The tutorial is over, and but I just want to say this product is amazing. And so I will soon work on a green marble and on a red marble, and I'll make sure I post the tutorials. All right? Thank you for following me, and talk to you soon.